Call came through at 3:15 a.m. while I was elbow deep in the blast furnace control panel, trying to isolate a cascade failure that had shut down $47 million worth of steel production equipment. My phone buzzed against my hip. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. I pulled off my work gloves and checked the screen. Bradley Henderson, my plant operations director at Pinnacle Steel Works, calling from the corporate office while I was managing a crisis costing $680,000 per hour in lost output. My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 47 years old, and I just got fired while fixing the worst production crisis in our Detroit plant's history. I almost didn't answer. When you're managing a furnace failure that could shut down half the Midwest steel supply chain, phone calls from management feel less urgent than the warning lights flashing red in front of you. But I answered anyway because that's what 24 years of being the guy who fixes impossible problems conditions you to do. Thompson speaking, Mac. It's Bradley. I need to inform you of a company decision. Effective immediately, we no longer require your services as senior production engineer. Your employment is terminated as of today. I looked at the control panel. Temperature gauge on furnace 3 showing 2,847 degrees and climbing past safety limits. Pressure relief valve 7 throwing intermittent readings. Production lines A, B, and C completely offline due to emergency shutdown protocols. Nicole Rodriguez, our plant safety manager, standing 10 feet away, looking at me with desperate hope because I was literally the only person who understood our legacy systems well enough to diagnose failures this complex. I understand, I said, keeping my voice level. I'll inform the safety manager that you'll be handling the shutdown procedures for the crisis I'm currently managing. Silence long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. What crisis? The furnace failure that brought me here at midnight. Lines A, B, and C are offline. The failure is costing approximately $680,000 per hour in lost production. I'm in the middle of diagnosing a pressure relief system cascade failure. I assume you'll want to send someone else to complete the resolution since I no longer work for Pinnacle Steel. More silence. I could hear him breathing. Mac, let's discuss this after you've resolved the situation. I don't think that's appropriate. You just terminated my employment. I shouldn't be working on Pinnacle projects if I'm no longer a Pinnacle employee. I'll brief Nicole on what I've diagnosed so far and catch the next flight back to Chicago. Or actually, not back to Chicago, since you said not to bother coming back to the office. I'll drive directly home to Michigan. Wait, Mac, let me call you back. He ended the call before I could respond. Let me explain who I am and why that phone call was the most expensive mistake Bradley Henderson ever made. I joined Pinnacle Steel Works in 2000 as a production engineer, specializing in blast furnace automation systems. 24 years of learning that when steel production breaks down, you fix it fast or entire supply chains collapse. Pinnacle designs and maintains high-precision steel production equipment for automotive companies where production line downtime costs hundreds of thousands of dollars per hour and safety failures can kill workers. My role was troubleshooting complex failures in the automated systems that kept our furnaces running. When production crashed and our maintenance team couldn't diagnose the problem, they called me. Over 24 years, I'd responded to 340 emergency production crises across the Great Lakes region. I diagnosed pressure system failures, valve sequencing errors, temperature control malfunctions, sensor drift, mechanical tolerance degradation, and dozens of other failure modes that could shut down multi-million-dollar production equipment. Most importantly, I developed deep institutional knowledge about the specific systems Pinnacle had designed and installed over 3 decades. Our Detroit facility had unique requirements. Every furnace had custom modifications. Every system had quirks and edge cases that existed only in my experience-based understanding of how those systems behaved under extreme conditions. That knowledge was what made me valuable. That knowledge was also what Bradley had just eliminated from Pinnacle's available expertise at the worst possible moment. The crisis had started 18 hours earlier. Great Lakes Industrial, one of our largest automotive steel suppliers, had called our emergency hotline reporting that 3 of their 4 production lines had shut down simultaneously due to furnace temperature instabilities. A single production line produced approximately $680,000 worth of automotive-grade steel per hour. 3 lines offline meant they were losing over $2 million per hour in production capacity. Pinnacle's standard protocol for crisis response was to start with remote diagnostics. I spent 6 hours on video calls with their maintenance team, walking them through diagnostic procedures and reviewing system logs. By midnight, I determined this wasn't something that could be resolved remotely. The failure pattern suggested a fundamental issue with the pressure relief system that managed safety protocols for all three affected lines. I drove to the Detroit facility. Arriving at 1:30 a.m., Nicole met me at the plant entrance. She looked exhausted. "Mac, thank you for coming. We've been offline for 19 hours. Corporate is asking why we can't fix this ourselves, because this failure pattern involves the legacy pressure compensation system. I need to examine the controllers directly." She led me to the production floor. 3 massive steel production lines, each one approximately 200 feet long, filled with blast furnaces, rolling mills, heat treatment systems, and the automated valve networks that managed everything with precision timing. All silent, all offline, all costing Great Lakes $680,000 per hour. I spent the next hour examining the pressure relief system, reviewing fault logs, testing sensor readings, and tracing the cascade failure pattern. By 3 a.m., I'd isolated the root cause, a software bug in the temperature compensation algorithm that managed pressure relief timing across thermal variations. Here's what happened. Detroit's facility had experienced unusual temperature fluctuations over the past week, ranging from 15 degrees to 73 degrees due to weather variations. The pressure relief system was designed to compensate for temperature-related pressure changes automatically. But the compensation algorithm had a subtle bug that accumulated rounding errors over multiple thermal cycles. After 8 days of temperature fluctuations, the accumulated errors had pushed the pressure relief timing outside acceptable tolerance. The system detected this and triggered emergency shutdown protocols on Line A. Lines B and C were connected to the same pressure manifold and automatically shut down as a safety precaution. The bug was in custom code that Pinnacle had written specifically for Great Lakes installation 7 years ago. That code existed nowhere else. I'd been part of the team that designed and implemented it. I was one of 2 people in the entire world who understood how it worked. Fixing it required modifying the temperature compensation algorithm to reset accumulated errors periodically, updating the furnace control firmware on all 3 production lines, recalibrating the pressure sensors, and then conducting a controlled restart sequence that verified everything was functioning correctly before restoring production. I estimated 12 to 16 hours of work. I started at 3:10 a.m. By 3:15 a.m., I was in the middle of uploading updated firmware to the control systems when Bradley called and told me I was fired. After Bradley hung up, Nicole approached me cautiously. "Mac, is everything all right? You look concerned." "I just got terminated by my employer while in the middle of fixing your production lines." Her expression went from concerned to horrified. "Terminated. But you're the only person who understands our system. What happens to our lines?" "That's an excellent question. Pinnacle will need to send someone else to complete the work. How long will that take? I don't know. The other engineer who understands this system is Adrian Walsh. He's in Pennsylvania managing a client crisis. Pinnacle might have to wait until he becomes available." "How long?" "Adrian's engagement in Pennsylvania is scheduled for another 8 days. Nicole's face went pale. "We can't wait 8 days. Every day offline costs us $16.3 million in lost production. 8 days would be over $130 million in losses." "Then I suggest you contact Pinnacle Corporate and explain the urgency." At 4:45 a.m., my phone rang again. Logan Pierce, Pinnacle's chief operating officer. Logan had been with the company for 16 years and understood exactly how critical my role was to client crisis management. "Mac, I just got off the phone with Bradley. There's been a misunderstanding about your employment status. We need you to complete the Great Lakes engagement before we discuss any personnel matters." "Logan, Bradley was very clear. He said my employment was terminated effective immediately, and I shouldn't bother coming back to the office." "That's not a misunderstanding. That's termination. I understand this is confusing, but let's focus on resolving Great Lakes crisis first. We can address your employment situation after you've restored their production lines. I don't think that's appropriate. If I'm terminated, I shouldn't be working on Pinnacle projects. If I'm not terminated, then Bradley needs to call me back and clarify that he made an error. This is a critical client situation. Great Lakes is one of our largest accounts. They're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars per hour. We need you to complete the repair work. Then you need to clarify my employment status first. Am I a Pinnacle employee or not?" Long pause. I could hear Logan thinking through the implications. If he said I was still employed, he'd be contradicting Bradley's termination and creating internal political problems. If he said I was terminated, he'd be admitting that Pinnacle had just eliminated their crisis response capability in the middle of their most expensive emergency. Mac, let me conference in Bradley so we can resolve this together. I'd rather you didn't. Bradley was clear about his decision. I'm respecting that decision by no longer working on Pinnacle projects. If Great Lakes needs assistance, they should contact Pinnacle's emergency response line and request another engineer. There is no other engineer available who understands Great Lakes' system. That's an unfortunate situation, but it's not my problem anymore since I'm no longer a Pinnacle employee. I ended the call. Nicole was standing nearby, having heard my side of the conversation. What should we do, Mac? You should contact Pinnacle and request emergency engineering support. Explain the urgency of the situation. They'll prioritize getting someone here as quickly as possible, but you're here now. You understand our system. You were in the middle of fixing it. Can't you just complete the work? I was fired 47 minutes ago. I can't ethically continue working on a project for a company that just terminated my employment. What if we hired you directly? Not through Pinnacle, but as an independent consultant working for Great Lakes. I thought about that carefully. That would create contractual complications. Great Lakes has a maintenance agreement with Pinnacle. That agreement probably has exclusivity provisions preventing you from hiring outside engineers to work on Pinnacle-designed systems. I'll check our contract. She pulled out her phone and called Great Lakes legal counsel in Dallas. Had a rapid conversation that I couldn't follow completely. Hung up and looked at me with cautious optimism. Our legal team says the maintenance agreement has exclusivity provisions for routine maintenance, but emergency repairs can be conducted by any qualified engineer if Pinnacle cannot provide timely support. They're defining timely support as within 24 hours of request. Has Great Lakes formally requested emergency support from Pinnacle? She sent an email to Pinnacle's emergency response team with me copied, formally requesting immediate engineering support for the production line failure and noting that the previous engineer was no longer available to complete the repair work. She marked it urgent and requested response within 2 hours. At 6:23 a.m., we received a response from Pinnacle's emergency coordinator. We acknowledge your request for emergency engineering support. Our senior production engineers are currently committed to other client emergencies. We are working to identify available resources and will provide an estimated response timeline within 12 hours. 12 hours meant Great Lakes would be offline for at least another half day, probably longer, meaning another $22 million in lost production at minimum. Nicole showed me the email. What does this mean? It means Pinnacle doesn't have anyone available to send. Adrian is in Pennsylvania and apparently nobody else at Pinnacle has the expertise to handle this type of failure. So we wait unless you want to exercise your contract provision and hire an independent consultant. Are you available? As an independent consultant, I could be. What would your rate be? I thought about that carefully. Independent consulting rates for emergency steel production crisis response typically range from $800 to $1,500 per hour, depending on expertise level and urgency. I was at the top of the expertise scale, and this was definitely urgent. $1,200 per hour for emergency crisis response, minimum 60-hour engagement to ensure complete resolution and system validation. That's $72,000 total. Payment terms: 50% deposit before I resume work, remaining 50% upon successful production line restoration. Nicole didn't hesitate. Done. I'll have our CFO process the deposit immediately. At 8:30 a.m. Wednesday morning, $36,000 cleared into my business account. At 8:45 a.m., I resumed work on Great Lakes pressure relief system. The work itself was methodical but complex. First, I had to complete the firmware modifications I'd started before Bradley's call interrupted me. The temperature compensation algorithm needed 3 specific changes: a periodic error reset function, improved temperature coefficient handling, and better tolerance management for the accumulated drift values. Each modification required careful testing in simulation mode before implementation. You don't upload untested firmware to a $60 million production facility. One mistake could damage equipment or create safety hazards that would make the current crisis look minor. By 2:50 p.m. Wednesday, I'd completed the algorithm modifications and begun the firmware upload process. This took another 4 hours because each production line had to be updated separately with extensive verification testing between uploads. While the firmware uploaded, I recalibrated the pressure sensors. These sensors had been drifting slightly over the past 18 months. Not enough to trigger maintenance alerts, but enough to contribute to the compensation algorithm's accumulated errors. The recalibration required precise adjustments to bring all sensors back to factory specifications. By 7 to 4 p.m. Wednesday, all firmware updates were complete and all sensors were recalibrated. Now came the critical phase, the controlled restart sequence. You can't just flip a switch and restart a steel production line. The startup process involves dozens of sequential steps, each with specific timing requirements and safety checkpoints. Temperature must be raised gradually. Pressure must be increased in controlled stages. Flow rates must be carefully managed to prevent thermal shock or mechanical stress. I started with line A at 7:30 p.m. The startup sequence took 3 hours and 15 minutes. At 10:45 p.m., line A was running at full production capacity with all systems functioning normally. Line B followed the same process starting at 11 p.m. By 2:30 a.m., Thursday, line B was operational. Line C was the last and most complex because it had additional safety interlocks that had to be verified during startup. I began the sequence at 3 a.m. By 4:30 a.m. By 4:30 a.m. Thursday morning, line C was restored to full production. Total downtime, 47 hours and 15 minutes. Total production loss, approximately $32 and $100 million. But all 3 lines were running again, and the fix I'd implemented would prevent recurrence of the temperature compensation bug. Nicole was watching the production monitors with visible relief as automotive-grade steel began moving through all 3 processing lines. Mac, I cannot thank you enough. You saved us from a disaster that would have been catastrophically worse if we'd waited for Pinnacle to send another engineer. You're welcome. I'll prepare a technical report documenting the failure, root cause, and repair procedures. You should share that with Pinnacle so they can update their systems documentation. Will you be available if we have questions during the follow-up period? Yes, my consulting arrangement includes 30 days of follow-up support for any issues related to this repair. At 5:15 a.m. Thursday morning, I received a call from Logan Pierce. I was back at my hotel, exhausted, but satisfied with the day's work. Mac, I understand you completed the Great Lakes repair work as an independent consultant. That's correct. We need to discuss your employment status. Bradley's decision to terminate you was premature. We'd like to offer you reinstatement with full back pay and benefits. I appreciate that, but I'm declining. I'm now operating as an independent consultant. It's more lucrative, and I have better control over which projects I accept. What does that mean for Pinnacle? You're our most experienced crisis response engineer. It means Pinnacle will need to develop other engineers with similar expertise or accept that your crisis response capability is significantly reduced. That's not acceptable. We have ongoing client emergencies that require your specific knowledge. Then Pinnacle should have considered that before terminating me while I was literally in the middle of managing one of those emergencies. Mac, I understand you're upset about how Bradley handled the situation. I'm not upset, Logan. I'm simply making rational business decisions based on new information. Bradley demonstrated that Pinnacle doesn't value my contributions enough to avoid terminating me during a crisis. I've learned from that demonstration. What would it take to bring you back to Pinnacle? I'm not interested in coming back, but I'm willing to discuss limited consulting arrangements for specific emergencies where my expertise is genuinely necessary. What would those arrangements look like? Pinnacle can retain me as an emergency crisis consultant, $1,500 per hour for active crisis work, $12,000 monthly retainer for availability and consultation, 6-month contract renewable at my discretion. I work remotely unless travel is absolutely necessary, and travel time is billed at the active crisis rate. Silence while Logan processed the numbers. My previous salary as senior production engineer had been $160,000 annually. I was now proposing a consulting arrangement that would cost Pinnacle approximately $144,000 annually just for the retainer, plus potentially hundreds of thousands more if they actually needed me for crisis response. That's significantly more expensive than your previous compensation. That's correct, but it's less expensive than what happened at Great Lakes when you didn't have me available. They lost $32.1 million during 47 hours of downtime. They would have lost over $130 million if they'd waited 8 days for Adrian to become available. My consulting rate is expensive. My absence is more expensive. I need to discuss this with executive leadership. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. Over the next 8 weeks, I received 12 emergency calls from former Pinnacle clients experiencing steel production crises. Each call followed the same pattern. Critical production failure. Pinnacle couldn't send an engineer quickly enough. Could I help as an independent consultant? I helped all 12 clients. Total consulting revenue, $420,000 for 8 weeks of work. Word was spreading fast in the steel production industry. The calls weren't just about money. These plant managers had worked with me for years through Pinnacle. They knew my capabilities and trusted my expertise. When their facilities faced critical failures, they wanted someone who could solve problems quickly and correctly the first time. By October, companies that had never worked with Pinnacle were calling me directly. Plant managers talked to each other at industry conferences. My name came up in conversations about emergency response and crisis management. The reputation I'd built over 24 years was now working for me instead of for Pinnacle. Mr. Thompson, this is Patricia Wells at Midwest Steel Processing. We've got a cascade failure in our rolling mill control system. Our maintenance team can't isolate the problem, and we're losing $420,000 per hour. Can you help us? These calls became routine. Emergency consulting work paid well, but the real value was in long-term relationships. Companies started asking if I'd be available on retainer for future emergencies. By November, I had consulting agreements with 14 different steel production facilities across Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana. Each wanted guaranteed access to my expertise when they needed it. Combined retainer revenue, $84,000 monthly, approximately $108 million annually, plus additional project fees for actual crisis work. The retainer contracts were smart business for everyone involved. The steel plants got priority access to specialized expertise. I got steady income and advanced notice of potential work. Everyone understood the value proposition. In November, Pinnacle formally offered me the consulting arrangement I'd proposed to Logan. $1,500 per hour for active work, $12,000 monthly retainer, 6-month renewable contract. I accepted because it was additional guaranteed revenue, and Pinnacle still represented a reliable source of emergency work. That same month, Bradley Henderson was terminated. The board had finally calculated the total cost of his decision to fire me during the Great Lakes crisis. The final tally was devastating for Pinnacle. Great Lakes had reduced their annual maintenance contract by $1.2 million, citing concerns about Pinnacle's crisis response capability. 6 other clients had similarly reduced their contracts after hearing about the Great Lakes situation, costing Pinnacle another $2.8 million in annual revenue. Pinnacle had paid premium rates to reassign Adrian from Pennsylvania and fly him to 3 emergency sites I would normally have handled, incurring $240,000 in expedited travel and overtime costs. The company was now paying me $144,000 annually in retainer fees, plus crisis rates that were nearly 10 times higher than my previous hourly compensation when calculated from my annual salary. Total cost to Pinnacle, approximately 4 times $7 million in direct losses, reduced contracts, and increased consulting expenses, all traceable to Bradley's decision to fire me at 3:15 a.m. While I was fixing a $60,000–$80,000 per hour crisis, Logan called me in December with news of Bradley's termination. Mac, I want you to know that Pinnacle has restructured our engineering management. Bradley is no longer with the company. We've learned from this situation. What have you learned? That institutional knowledge has value that isn't captured in salary comparisons. That crisis response capability requires deep expertise that can't be quickly replaced. That decisions about personnel should consider operational impact, not just budget line items. Those are expensive lessons, but important ones. We'd like to discuss bringing you back as a full-time employee. We're prepared to offer significantly improved compensation and a formal role as Director of Crisis Response Engineering. I appreciate that, but I'm earning more as an independent consultant than I ever did as a Pinnacle employee, and I have better work-life balance because I choose which projects to accept. Why would I give that up to return to a company that demonstrated it doesn't value expertise until after eliminating it? Because you built your career at Pinnacle. Because we value your contributions now. Because we want to make this right. Logan, you can make this right by continuing our consulting arrangement and by valuing your remaining engineers appropriately. Don't repeat with someone else what Bradley did to me. We've learned from the $427 million lesson. I stayed independent. By December 2024, I was managing 14 long-term consulting relationships with steel production facilities across 4 states. Annual revenue was approaching $1.1 million. I was working approximately 60% of the hours I'd worked at Pinnacle, while earning nearly 7 times my previous salary. More importantly, I was respected and valued. When clients called me for crisis response, they understood they were paying premium rates for premium expertise. Nobody questioned my methods or complained about my fees. They'd all seen what happened when production systems failed and specialized knowledge wasn't available. The most dangerous employee to terminate isn't the one who complains or threatens to quit. It's the specialist who's literally solving a crisis that nobody else understands when you decide their position is expendable. Because specialized knowledge doesn't disappear when you eliminate the specialist. The knowledge walks out the door with them, and when the next crisis occurs, you discover that institutional expertise can't be quickly replaced. Sometimes the most effective response to being undervalued isn't argument or confrontation. It's simply allowing people to experience the full consequences of their decisions while you build something better for yourself. Bradley wanted me gone. I left. Then reality taught him why expertise matters and what institutional knowledge is actually worth. That was 18 months ago. Today, I'm running Thompson Steel Crisis, consulting with 16 major clients across the Midwest. The phone still rings with emergency calls, but now I choose which ones to take. Last month, Pinnacle called again, another crisis, bigger than the last one. I quoted them my current rate, $1,800 per hour. They accepted without hesitation. Sometimes the best career move is getting fired by someone who doesn't understand what you're worth. The real lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about discovering that when you're truly irreplaceable, the market will always find a way to pay you what you're actually worth, regardless of what any single employer thinks you deserve. In the end, Bradley did me the biggest favor of my career by forcing me to realize that my expertise had outgrown the salary cage I'd accepted for over 2 decades.